Andrew's ambitious plans for an abandoned store in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood took a chilling turn when he discovered two children hiding in the basement. As he delved deeper into their mysterious past, he uncovered dark secrets that threatened to shatter his world. What happens next will leave you breathless. Like and subscribe for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The crisp autumn air bit at Andrew's face as he stood before the dilapidated storefront in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. His breath formed small clouds in the chilly morning, a stark contrast to the warmth of excitement bubbling in his chest. This was it, his big break, the chance to prove himself in the cutthroat world of Chicago real estate. The store's faded sign hung precariously above, barely legible after years of neglect. Morales Family Groceries, it read, or at least that's what Andrew could make out. He fumbled with the old key, its brass dulled by time, before finally hearing the satisfying click of the lock giving way. As the door creaked open, a musty smell assaulted his nostrils. Dust particles danced in the thin beams of light, filtering through the grimy windows. Andrew stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The shelves stood bare, a few tattered cardboard boxes scattered across the floor, remnants of a business long abandoned. He moved deeper into the store, his mind already racing with plans for renovation. This place would be transformed, he thought. Gone would be the peeling wallpaper and cracked linoleum. In its place, he envisioned sleek displays and modern fixtures, a testament to his vision and business acumen. A sudden noise froze Andrew in his tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but in the stillness of the abandoned store, it rang out like a gunshot. He held his breath, straining his ears. There it was again, a soft whimper, unmistakably human. "Hello?" Andrew called out, his voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" Silence answered him. He took a few tentative steps forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound seemed to be coming from the back of the store. As he approached, he noticed a door he hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind a fallen shelf. With trembling hands, Andrew pushed the shelf aside and grasped the doorknob. It was ice cold to the touch. He hesitated for a moment, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to call the police, to do anything but open that door. But curiosity won out, and with a deep breath, he turned the knob. The door opened to reveal a set of stairs leading down into darkness. The musty smell grew stronger, mixed with something else, something Andrew couldn't quite place. He fumbled for his phone, switching on the flashlight app before descending into the gloom. The basement was a maze of shadows, the beam from his phone cutting through the darkness like a knife. Old boxes and forgotten furniture loomed like silent sentinels. And then, in the far corner, Andrew's light fell upon something that made his blood run cold. A pair of wide, terrified eyes stared back at him. It was a little girl, no more than 10 years old, her dark hair matted and dirty. She was huddled protectively over a bundle in her arms, a baby, its tiny face barely visible in the dim light. "Oh my God," Andrew breathed, his mind reeling. "Are you okay? What are you doing down here?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she pressed herself further into the corner, clutching the baby tighter to her chest. Her eyes never left Andrew's face, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance that broke his heart. "It's okay," he said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Andrew. Can you tell me yours?" For a long moment, the only sound was the soft whimpering of the baby. Then, so quietly Andrew almost missed it, the girl whispered, "Maggie, Maggie," Andrew repeated, offering a gentle smile. "That's a pretty name. And who's this little one?" Maggie hesitated, her eyes darting between Andrew and the stairs, as if gauging her chances of escape. Finally, she murmured, "Eli, my brother." Andrew's mind was racing. Two children, alone in the basement of an abandoned store. How long had they been here? Where were their parents? He knew he should call the authorities, but something held him back. The terror in Maggie's eyes spoke of a fear deeper than just being found in this dark place. "Maggie," he said gently, "are you hungry? I have some granola bars in my car. Would you like one?" At the mention of food, Maggie's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing her face. She nodded slowly, her grip on Eli loosening ever so slightly. "Okay," Andrew said, standing up slowly. "I'm going to go get them. I'll be right back, I promise. Will you wait here for me?" Maggie nodded again, her eyes never leaving his face. Andrew backed away slowly, his mind whirling with questions and concerns. As he climbed the stairs and emerged into the dusty store, he felt as if he'd stepped into another world. The bright autumn sunlight streaming through the dirty windows seemed surreal after the darkness of the basement. He rushed to his car, grabbing the granola bars from the glove compartment. As he turned to head back inside, a glint of metal caught his eye. There, half hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers on the passenger seat, was the gun he kept for protection. Andrew hesitated for a moment, then grabbed it, tucking it into the waistband of his jeans. He didn't know what kind of situation he was walking into, but he wasn't taking any chances. Back in the basement, Maggie hadn't moved from her corner. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the granola bars, but she made no move to take them when Andrew held them out. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're for you and Eli. Please, eat." Slowly, as if afraid he might snatch them away at any moment, Maggie reached out and took the bars. She tore one open with her teeth, breaking off a small piece and carefully feeding it to Eli before taking a bite herself. The way she ate, savoring each morsel, told Andrew all he needed to know about how long it had been since their last meal. As they ate, Andrew tried to piece together their story. "Maggie," he began gently, "how long have you been down here?" Maggie shrugged, her eyes downcast. "Don't know. Long time. And your parents? Where are they?" At this, Maggie's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Gone," she whispered, hugging Eli closer. Andrew's heart broke for these children, alone and afraid in this dark place. He knew he should call the police, child services, someone who could help. But as he looked at Maggie's terrified face, he hesitated. Something about this situation felt off, dangerous even. He couldn't shake the feeling that by bringing in the authorities, he might be putting these kids in even more danger. "Maggie," he said, making a decision he knew might come back to haunt him, "how would you like to come with me? Just for a little while. I have a warm apartment, food, clean clothes. You and Eli could get cleaned up, rest a bit. Would you like that?" Maggie's eyes widened, a mix of hope and suspicion battling in her gaze. "You won't call the police?" Andrew shook his head. "Not if you don't want me to. I just want to help you, Maggie, you and Eli." For a long moment, Maggie said nothing, her eyes searching Andrew's face as if looking for any sign of deceit. Then, slowly, she nodded. Relief washed over Andrew, followed quickly by a wave of anxiety. What was he doing? Taking two clearly traumatized children to his home instead of contacting the proper authorities? But as he helped Maggie to her feet, saw the trust beginning to form in her eyes, he knew he couldn't have done anything else. As they made their way up the stairs, Maggie clutching Eli tightly to her chest, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. The store suddenly felt different, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. His eyes darted to the shadows, half expecting to see someone or something lurking there. Just as they reached the door, a loud crash from the back of the store made them all jump. Maggie let out a small scream, burying her face in Andrew's side. He instinctively reached for the gun at his waistband, his heart pounding. "What was that?" Maggie whimpered, her voice muffled against his jacket. Andrew swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the dimly lit store. "I don't know," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you or Eli. I promise." As they stood there, frozen in fear, Andrew couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. The abandoned store, once just a business opportunity, now felt like the gateway to a mystery he wasn't sure he wanted to unravel. But with Maggie trembling against him and baby Eli whimpering softly, he knew there was no turning back now. Whatever secrets this old store held, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows, Andrew was now irrevocably involved. And as the sound of footsteps echoed from the back of the store, growing louder with each passing second, he realized that his life would never be the same again. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the empty store. Andrew's hand tightened on the gun in his waistband, his other arm wrapped protectively around Maggie and Eli. His mind raced, trying to think of an escape route, but the only way out was through the front door, directly in the path of whoever was approaching. "Stay behind me," Andrew whispered to Maggie, gently pushing her back as he took a step forward. The girl whimpered softly but obeyed, clutching her baby brother tighter. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the store. Andrew's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the police uniform. For a split second, relief washed over him until he saw the officer's face. The man's eyes were cold, calculating, a stark contrast to the friendly demeanor one might expect from law enforcement. His gaze swept over Andrew, then locked onto Maggie and Eli. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. "Well, well," the officer drawled, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "What do we have here?" Andrew swallowed hard, his mind racing. Something was off about this officer, but he couldn't put his finger on what. "Officer," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "I can explain. I just bought this property and—" "Save it," the officer cut him off, taking a step closer. "I'm not interested in your story. I'm here for them." He nodded towards Maggie and Eli. Maggie let out a small cry of fear, pressing herself closer to Andrew. The sound seemed to trigger something in the officer, his smile widening as he took another step forward. Now, sweetheart," he cooed, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Don't be afraid. I'm here to take you home." Andrew's instincts screamed danger. Without thinking, he pulled out his gun, pointing it at the officer. "Stay back," he warned, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but you're not taking these kids anywhere." The officer's eyes narrowed, all pretense of friendliness dropping from his face. "You're making a big mistake, buddy," he growled. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in." "Maybe not," Andrew replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. "But I know something's not right here. A real cop would be more concerned about two kids found in an abandoned building." For a moment, tension crackled in the air between them. Then, without warning, the officer lunged forward. Andrew barely had time to react before the man was on him, knocking the gun from his hand and sending it skittering across the floor. "Run, Maggie!" Andrew yelled as he grappled with the attacker. "Get out of here!" Maggie hesitated for a split second, then turned and fled towards the back of the store, Eli clutched tightly in her arms. The officer tried to break free to pursue them, but Andrew held on with all his might, knowing the children's lives depended on him. The fight was brutal and quick. Despite Andrew's best efforts, the officer's training gave him the upper hand. A well-placed punch left Andrew seeing stars, his grip loosening just enough for the man to break free. As Andrew struggled to his feet, his vision blurry and his head pounding, he saw the officer disappear into the back of the store in pursuit of Maggie and Eli. Panic gave him strength, and he staggered after them, praying he wasn't too late. The back of the store opened into a small alley, littered with trash and forgotten debris. Andrew burst out into the cold air, his eyes frantically searching for any sign of Maggie or the officer. A scream from further down the alley sent him running, his heart pounding in his chest. He rounded a corner to find Maggie backed against a chain-link fence, Eli wailing in her arms. The officer stood before them, reaching out to grab them. Without thinking, Andrew charged, tackling the man to the ground. They rolled on the dirty pavement, trading blows. Andrew fought with a desperation he'd never known before, fueled by the need to protect the children who had so unexpectedly come into his life. But the officer was stronger, more skilled, With a sickening crack, the man's fist connected with Andrew's jaw, sending him sprawling. As he lay there, dazed and in pain, Andrew saw the officer turn back towards Maggie and Eli. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face as she tried to climb the fence one-handed, Eli secure in her other arm. "Please," Andrew croaked, reaching out a hand. "Don't hurt them." The officer paused, looking back at Andrew with contempt. "You should have minded your own business," he spat. "Now you'll have to be dealt with too." Just as the man's hand closed around Maggie's arm, a shout from the entrance to the alley made them all freeze. "Chicago PD! Hands where I can see them!" Two uniformed officers appeared, guns drawn. The fake officer's face contorted with rage, but he slowly raised his hands, releasing Maggie. As one of the officers moved to handcuff him, the other rushed to check on Andrew and the children. "Are you all right, sir?" the officer asked, helping Andrew to his feet. "We got a call about a disturbance. What happened here?" Andrew's head was spinning, both from the fight and the rapid turn of events. I'm not sure," he admitted. "I found these kids in the basement of my store, and then this guy showed up pretending to be a cop." The officer's brow furrowed as he looked at Maggie and Eli, then back at Andrew. "We're going to need you all to come down to the station," he said. "There are a lot of questions that need answering." As they were led to the waiting police cars, Andrew caught Maggie's eye. The fear in her gaze was palpable, and he realized with a sinking feeling that their ordeal was far from over. Whatever secrets lay behind Maggie and Eli's presence in that basement, whatever had brought that fake officer to the store, it was all part of something much bigger and more dangerous than Andrew could have imagined. The ride to the police station was a blur. Andrew's jaw throbbed, and his thoughts were a jumbled mess of questions and fears. He kept glancing at Maggie and Eli, who were huddled together in the back seat, the baby eerily quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. At the station, they were separated. Andrew's heart clenched as he watched a female officer lead Maggie and Eli away, the girl's tearful face turning back to look at him one last time before they disappeared around a corner. "Mr. Thompson?" A voice broke through his thoughts. Andrew turned to see a detective standing before him, a stern look on his face. "I'm Detective Ramirez. We need to talk about what happened today." The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a far cry from the warmth and excitement Andrew had felt that morning as he'd unlocked the store. As he recounted the day's events to Detective Ramirez, he could see the disbelief growing in the man's eyes. "Let me get this straight," Ramirez said, leaning back in his chair. "You bought an abandoned store, found two kids living in the basement, decided to take them home instead of calling the authorities, and then got into a fight with a man impersonating a police officer? Do you realize how insane this sounds?" Andrew ran a hand through his hair, wincing as his fingers brushed against a tender spot. "I know it sounds crazy," he admitted, "but it's the truth. Those kids were terrified. I couldn't just leave them there." Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "And it didn't occur to you that there might be a reason they were hiding, that maybe they were running from something, or someone?" A chill ran down Andrew's spine at the implication. "What are you saying? Do you know something about Maggie and Eli?" The detective was silent for a moment, studying Andrew's face. Then he sighed, seeming to come to a decision. "The children you found, Maggie and Eli Morales, have been missing for over 6 months. Their parents were found dead in their home, and the kids just vanished." Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. "Dead? But how? Who would—" "That's what we've been trying to figure out," Ramirez cut in. "The case went cold. Until today." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything else you're not telling us? Anything at all that might help us understand what's going on?" Andrew opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, a commotion outside the interrogation room caught their attention. Raised voices and the sound of running feet echoed through the hallway. Ramirez was on his feet in an instant, yanking open the door. "What's going on?" he barked at a passing officer. The young cop skidded to a halt, his face pale. "It's the kids, sir," he panted. The ones that were brought in with Mr. Thompson. They're gone." "Gone?" Ramirez repeated incredulously. "What do you mean, gone? This is a police station, for God's sake." "We don't know how it happened," the officer explained, his voice shaking slightly. "One minute they were in the interview room with Officer Chen. The next, they just vanished. And sir," he hesitated, glancing nervously at Andrew. "Spit it out, rookie," Ramirez growled. "The man we arrested at the scene, the one impersonating an officer, he's gone too." Andrew felt his knees go weak, gripping the doorframe for support. Maggie and Eli gone again, and the man who had tried to take them, loose in the city. The gravity of the situation crashed over him like a wave. As alarms began to blare throughout the station and officers rushed to and fro, Andrew caught Detective Ramirez's eye. The look they shared was one of mutual understanding and dread. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than either of them had realized. And now, two innocent children were caught in the middle of it all. Ramirez turned to Andrew, his face grim. "I hope you're ready for a long night, Mr. Thompson," he said, "because until we find those kids, nobody's going anywhere." As the chaos of the police station swirled around him, Andrew couldn't shake the image of Maggie's terrified face from his mind. He had promised to protect her and Eli, and he had failed. But as he clenched his fists, determination rising within him, he made a new promise. To himself, to the missing children, and to whatever forces were working against them. He would find Maggie and Eli. He would uncover the truth behind their parents' deaths and their mysterious disappearance. And he would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. Little did Andrew know, as he stood in that bustling police station, that his promise would lead him down a dark and dangerous path, one that would test his courage, challenge his beliefs, and force him to confront secrets that had long been buried in the shadows of Chicago's streets. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Andrew found himself in the heart of a police investigation, watching as officers scurried about, barking orders and poring over security footage. The disappearance of two children and a suspect from within the station had sent shockwaves through the entire department. Detective Ramirez had set up a command center in one of the larger conference rooms. Maps of Chicago covered the walls, red pins marking potential locations where Maggie and Eli might have been taken. Andrew sat in a corner, his head in his hands, feeling utterly helpless. "Mr. Thompson," Ramirez's voice cut through his thoughts, "I need you to focus. You're the last person who had extended contact with the children. Is there anything at all that Maggie might have said that could give us a clue about where they might go?" Andrew racked his brain, trying to recall every word of his brief interactions with the girl. She didn't say much, he admitted. "She was terrified, Detective. All she wanted was to protect her brother." Ramirez sighed, frustration evident in his voice. "And you're sure you had never seen them before today? Never heard anything about missing children in the area?" "No, nothing," Andrew insisted. "I'm new to the neighborhood. I just bought that store to renovate it. I had no idea." His voice trailed off as a thought struck him. "Wait, the store. Morales Family Groceries. That was the name on the sign. You said their last name was Morales, right?" The detective's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, that's right. Maggie and Eli Morales." "Could it be connected?" Andrew asked, a glimmer of hope rising in his chest. "Maybe that store belonged to their family." Ramirez was already moving, shouting orders to his team. "I want everything we can find on that store. Property records, business licenses, the works, and someone get me the case files on the Morales murders. Now!" As the room erupted into a flurry of activity, Andrew felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Officer Chen, the young cop who had been with Maggie and Eli when they disappeared. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, her eyes filled with guilt. I'm so sorry. I don't know how it happened. One minute they were there and the next." Andrew patted her hand awkwardly. "It's not your fault," he assured her, even as his heart ached at the thought of the children alone and afraid once more. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "Anything you remember might help." Officer Chen took a shaky breath. I was interviewing Maggie. She was so scared, wouldn't say much. Eli had finally fallen asleep. Then my radio crackled. There was some kind of disturbance downstairs. I turned away for just a second to check my radio, and when I looked back, they were gone. The window was open, but we're on the 3rd floor. It's impossible. Her voice trailed off, and Andrew could see the confusion and disbelief in her eyes. It didn't make sense. How could 2 children, one of them a baby, simply vanish from a room on the 3rd floor of a police station? Before he could ponder this further, Ramirez's voice boomed across the room. "We've got something!" Andrew hurried over to where the detective stood, surrounded by a team of officers, all peering at a computer screen. "The store," Ramirez explained, his eyes never leaving the monitor. "It was indeed owned by the Morales family. Purchased by Miguel Morales, Maggie and Eli's father, 10 years ago. But here's where it gets interesting." He pointed to a section of the report. "The store was sold 6 months ago, right around the time the family disappeared." "Sold to whom?" Andrew asked, leaning in to get a better look. Ramirez's face was grim as he turned to face Andrew. "To a holding company, Golden Horizon LLC. On the surface, it looks like a normal real estate investment firm, but our database has it flagged. We suspect it's a front for money laundering, possibly connected to one of the major crime syndicates in the city." The implications hit Andrew like a punch to the gut. You think the Morales family was killed because of the store?" "It's a possibility we can't ignore," Ramirez nodded, "but it doesn't explain why the children were kept alive or why they were hiding in that basement." A young officer piped up from the back of the room. "Sir, I've been going through the family's financial records. There are some irregularities in the months leading up to their disappearance. Large cash deposits, withdrawals from accounts we didn't even know existed." Ramirez's brow furrowed. "Miguel Morales was just a grocery store owner. Where was all this money coming from?" The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture that made Andrew's blood run cold. An ordinary family, a struggling business, sudden influxes of cash, and then tragedy. "They got in over their heads," Andrew murmured, the realization dawning on him. Maybe they needed money, turned to the wrong people for help, and when they couldn't pay, the parents were eliminated, Ramirez finished grimly, but the kids were kept as leverage, insurance, maybe. Or, he didn't need to finish the thought. The implications were too horrifying to contemplate. Suddenly, an alarm blared from one of the computers. An officer called out, "Detective, we've got a hit on facial recognition. The suspect, the one who was impersonating a cop, he's been spotted on a traffic cam heading west on Madison Street." Ramirez sprang into action. "All units, move out! I want that car intercepted. Thompson, you're with me." "What? But I'm not." Andrew began to protest, but Ramirez cut him off. "You're involved now, whether you like it or not. Those kids trust you. If we find them, we're going to need you there." As they raced out of the station and into a waiting police car, sirens blaring, Andrew's mind was reeling. How had a simple real estate venture turned into this nightmare? And more importantly, where were Maggie and Eli? The car sped through the streets of Chicago, weaving through traffic with practiced precision. Andrew gripped the door handle, his knuckles white, as Ramirez barked orders into his radio. They turned onto Madison Street, joining a convoy of police vehicles, all converging on their target. Up ahead, Andrew could see a black SUV swerving dangerously through traffic. "That's him," Ramirez growled. "All units, prepare to—" His words were cut off by a deafening explosion. The SUV ahead of them erupted into a fireball, flipping through the air and crashing into a nearby building. Cars screeched to a halt, horns blaring as smoke and debris filled the air. Ramirez slammed on the brakes, the police car skidding to a stop just short of the inferno. "Stay here," he shouted at Andrew as he leapt from the vehicle, gun drawn. But Andrew couldn't stay put. His heart racing, he stumbled out of the car, coughing as acrid smoke filled his lungs. Through the haze, he could see officers approaching the burning wreckage, calling for fire crews and ambulances. As he watched, a figure emerged from the smoke. For a moment, Andrew's heart leaped, thinking it might be Maggie or Eli, but as the figure came into focus, he realized it was a man, his clothes singed, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. It was the fake officer from the store. The man stumbled forward, his eyes wild and unfocused. He spotted Andrew and froze, recognition dawning on his face. For a split second they stared at each other, the chaos of the scene fading into the background. Then without warning the man turned and ran, disappearing down a side street. "Hey!" Andrew shouted, already giving chase. "Stop! Police!" He heard Ramirez yelling behind him, but he couldn't stop. This man was his only link to Maggie and Eli. He couldn't let him get away. Andrew ran harder than he'd ever run in his life, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He followed the man down twisting alleys and across busy streets, narrowly avoiding cars as he kept his quarry in sight. Finally, he saw the man duck into an abandoned building. Andrew followed, caution thrown to the wind in his desperation to find answers. The interior of the building was dark and musty, filled with shadows and echoes. Andrew moved carefully, straining his ears for any sound of movement. "I know you're in here," he called out, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. "Please, I just want to talk. Those kids, Maggie and Eli, where are they? Are they safe?" A chilling laugh echoed through the empty space. "Safe?" The man's voice rang out, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You have no idea what's going on, do you? Those kids were never safe, and now, thanks to you, they never will be." Andrew's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What's going to happen to them?" "You should have minded your own business," the voice continued, growing closer. "Now you're part of this too. And trust me, you don't want to be part of this." Suddenly, Andrew felt the cold press of a gun barrel against the back of his head. He froze, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Turn around," the man growled. "Slowly." Andrew complied, raising his hands as he turned to face his captor. The man's face was a mask of desperation and fear, his hand shaking as he held the gun. "Please," Andrew said softly, trying to keep his voice calm. "Just tell me where the children are. They don't deserve this. Whatever's going on, they're innocent." The man's face twisted into a bitter smile. "Innocent? Maybe. But they're also valuable. More valuable than you could possibly imagine." "What do you mean? Valuable to whom?" The man opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a noise from outside the building caught their attention. Police sirens, growing closer by the second, panic flashed across the man's face. He grabbed Andrew roughly, spinning him around and pressing the gun to his temple. "Move!" he hissed. "We're getting out of here!" As the man forced him towards a back exit, Andrew's mind raced. He had to do something, had to find a way to turn this situation around. Maggie and Eli were counting on him, even if they didn't know it. They emerged into a dim alley, the sounds of approaching police growing louder. The man looked around frantically, clearly searching for an escape route. In that moment of distraction, Andrew made his move. He threw his elbow back, connecting solidly with the man's solar plexus. The gun went off, the bullet ricocheting off a nearby dumpster as the man doubled over, gasping for air. Andrew spun around, tackling his assailant to the ground. They grappled in the dirty alley, each fighting for control of the weapon. Andrew could hear shouts now, police officers closing in on their location. With a burst of desperate strength, Andrew managed to wrench the gun from the man's grasp. He scrambled backward, pointing the weapon at his attacker with shaking hands. "Don't move," he panted. "It's over." The man lay on the ground, his chest heaving as he glared up at Andrew. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You have no idea what you've started. They'll come for you now. They'll come for all of you." Before Andrew could respond, police officers flooded the alley, weapons drawn. Detective Ramirez appeared at his side, gently taking the gun from his trembling hands. "Are you all right?" Ramirez asked, concern evident in his voice. Andrew nodded numbly. his eyes still fixed on the man being handcuffed and led away. He said something about Maggie and Eli being valuable, that they would come for us now. What did he mean? Ramirez's face was grim as he watched the suspect being put into a police car. I don't know, he admitted, but I have a feeling we're only scratching the surface of something much bigger and much more dangerous than we initially thought. As they walked back to Ramirez's car, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. He had started this day with dreams of renovating an old store, of making his mark on the business world. Now he found himself embroiled in a mystery that threatened not only his life, but the lives of two innocent children. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city streets. As Andrew climbed into the passenger seat of Ramirez's car, he realized that his life had irrevocably changed. There would be no going back to normal, not until he found Maggie and Eli and uncovered the truth behind their disappearance. Little did he know, the journey ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined, forcing him to confront dark truths about the city he called home and the people he thought he could trust. As night fell over Chicago, Andrew steeled himself for what was to come, unaware that the real dangers were only just beginning to reveal themselves. The interrogation room at the police station felt even colder and more oppressive than before. Andrew sat across from Detective Ramirez, his body aching from the fight in the alley, his mind reeling from the events of the past 24 hours. The fake officer, now identified as one Jack Donovan, was being held in another part of the station, stubbornly refusing to cooperate. "Run it by me one more time," Ramirez said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "Every detail you can remember." Andrew closed his eyes, trying to focus on the confrontation in the abandoned building. "He said the kids were valuable, more valuable than I could imagine, and he mentioned that they would come for us now." Ramirez nodded, scribbling notes. "Any idea who they might be?" "No," Andrew shook his head. But the way he said it was like he was terrified of them. Whoever they are, they're powerful enough to scare a guy who was willing to impersonate a cop and kidnap children. The detective leaned back in his chair, a grim expression on his face. "We've been digging into Donovan's background. He's got a record, mostly petty crimes. But about a year ago, he dropped off the grid completely. No credit card activity, no phone records, nothing. Then he resurfaces trying to snatch two kids from a police station. It doesn't add up." Andrew's mind was racing. What about the store? The Morales family? There has to be a connection. Ramirez nodded. "We're working on that angle. The company that bought the store, Golden Horizon LLC, is proving difficult to trace. It's a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. Whoever's behind it has gone to great lengths to stay hidden." A knock on the door interrupted them. Officer Chen poked her head in, her face pale. "Detective, you need to see this." They followed her to the bullpen where a crowd of officers had gathered around a television. A news anchor was speaking, her voice grave. "Breaking news. Chicago police have confirmed that two children previously thought to be missing were briefly in custody before disappearing again under mysterious circumstances. Sources say the children, Maggie and Eli Morales, are at the center of an ongoing investigation into organized crime and possible corruption within the police department itself." Andrew felt his stomach drop. How did they get this information? Ramirez's face was thunderous. Someone talked. "This case is supposed to be under wraps." He turned to his team. "I want to know who leaked this, and I want to know now." As the station erupted into chaos, Andrew's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, not recognizing the number on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered, "Hello? Mr. Thompson." The voice on the other end was distorted, unrecognizable. "I believe we have a mutual interest in the well-being of two young children." Andrew's heart raced. He caught Ramirez's eye, mouthing, "Trace this call," and putting the phone on speaker. "Who is this? Do you know where Maggie and Eli are?" "Who I am is not important," the voice continued. "What matters is that I can help you find the children. But I need something from you first." Ramirez was frantically gesturing to his team, mouthing, "Keep him talking," to Andrew. "What do you want?" Andrew asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "In the basement of the store where you found the children, there's a hidden compartment behind the north wall. Inside, you'll find a USB drive. Bring it to the Buckingham Fountain in Grant Park at midnight. Come alone, or the children will suffer." The line went dead. Andrew looked at Ramirez, his face pale. "What do we do?" The detective's expression was grim. "We've got no choice. We need to check out that basement, but you're not going to that meeting alone, that's for damn sure." An hour later, Andrew found himself back at the abandoned store, this time accompanied by a team of police officers. The basement seemed even more ominous now, the shadows deeper, the air heavier with unspoken secrets. "North wall," Ramirez muttered, running his hands along the rough surface. "There has to be some kind of— Aha!" A section of the wall swung open, revealing a small cavity. Inside, just as the mysterious caller had said, was a USB drive. "Don't touch it," Ramirez warned, pulling on a pair of gloves. He carefully extracted the drive, sealing it in an evidence bag. "We need to get this analyzed before the meeting. Maybe it'll give us a clue about what we're dealing with." Back at the station, tension was high as they waited for the tech team to finish examining the drive. Andrew paced the length of Ramirez's office, unable to sit still. "What if it's a trap?" he asked for what felt like the 100th time. "Of course it's a trap," Ramirez replied, his voice tight with stress. "The question is, what kind of trap? And how do we turn it to our advantage?" Before Andrew could respond, a young officer burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "Detective, we've cracked the drive. You're going to want to see this." They hurried to the tech lab, where a series of images were displayed on a large screen. Andrew's breath caught in his throat as he recognized what he was seeing. "Are those financial records?" the tech analyst confirmed. "Ledgers, account numbers, transaction histories. It's a goldmine of information on money laundering operations across the city. And look at this." He pulled up another document. A list of names, police officers, judges, city officials, all on someone's payroll. Ramirez whistled low. "This is big, bigger than anything we've seen before. No wonder they want this drive back so badly." Andrew's mind was reeling. But what does this have to do with Maggie and Eli? Why were they hiding in that basement? The detective's face was grim. "My guess, their parents stumbled onto this information somehow. Maybe they were involved, maybe they just found out by accident. Either way, it got them killed. And the kids?" "Insurance," Ramirez said softly. "Leverage to make sure no one else comes forward with this information." Andrew felt sick. 2 innocent children, caught in the middle of something so vast and corrupt. "We have to save them," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Ramirez nodded. "We will, but we need to be smart about this. Whoever's behind all this, they're powerful and dangerous. One wrong move and those kids are as good as dead." As midnight approached, Andrew found himself at Buckingham Fountain, wired with a hidden microphone and surrounded by undercover officers. The park was eerily quiet, the usual tourists and locals long gone for the night. His heart pounded as he clutched the USB drive in his pocket. They had made a copy, of course, but the original was what the mysterious caller had demanded. As the fountain's lights played across the water, casting shifting shadows, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. A figure emerged from the darkness, walking with purpose towards the fountain. As they drew closer, Andrew's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, her face hidden by the shadows, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her. She stopped a few feet away, her voice low and urgent. "Do you have it?" Andrew nodded, his mouth dry. "Where are the children?" The woman held out her hand. "The drive first. Then we'll talk about the children." Reluctantly, Andrew pulled out the USB drive. As he was about to hand it over, a gust of wind blew the woman's hair back from her face. In the flickering light of the fountain, he caught a glimpse of her features, and his world tilted on its axis. "Oh my God," he breathed, stumbling backward. "It's you! But how? You're supposed to be—" Before he could finish, a shot rang out, echoing across the park. The woman's eyes widened in shock, a red stain blossoming on her chest. As she crumpled to the ground, chaos erupted around them. Police officers swarmed the area, shouting orders and securing the perimeter, but Andrew barely noticed. He knelt beside the fallen woman, cradling her head in his lap as her life ebbed away. With her last breath, she whispered something that chilled him to his core. A name, a location, and a warning that would change everything. As sirens wailed in the distance and Ramirez ran towards him, gun drawn, Andrew realized that they had only scratched the surface of this conspiracy. The truth was far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined, and the clock was ticking for Maggie and Eli. The woman's final words echoed in his mind, a cryptic message that held the key to unraveling this entire mystery. But as he looked up at Ramirez, saw the questions burning in the detective's eyes, Andrew made a split-second decision. He would keep this information to himself, at least for now, because if what the woman had told him was true, then no one could be trusted, not even the police. As the park erupted into a frenzy of activity, Andrew steeled himself for what was to come. He had started this journey to save 2 children, but now he realized that the stakes were so much higher. The fate of Maggie and Eli, the corruption in Chicago, and perhaps even his own past, were all intertwined in a web of deceit that he was only beginning to unravel. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with possibilities, Andrew watched as the woman's body was covered and taken away. He knew that from this moment on, every step he took would be fraught with danger, but he had come too far to turn back now. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to break over the Chicago skyline. A new day was beginning, but for Andrew, it felt like the darkness was only growing deeper. Little did he know, the most challenging and dangerous part of his journey was yet to come. The chaos at Buckingham Fountain had barely subsided when Detective Ramirez pulled Andrew into a nearby police van. The detective's face was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, and a hint of fear that Andrew had never seen before. "What the hell happened out there, Thompson?" Ramirez demanded, his voice low and intense. "Who was that woman? What did she say to you?" Andrew's mind raced. The woman's final words echoed in his head, a secret he wasn't sure he could share. He took a deep breath, buying time to compose his thoughts. I'm not sure," he lied, hating himself for the deception. It happened so fast. She just fell, and then there was blood everywhere. Ramirez's eyes narrowed, clearly not believing him. "Cut the crap, Thompson. I saw your face when you recognized her. Who was she?" Andrew's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, but the woman's warning rang in his ears. Trust no one, not even the police. For a moment, I thought I knew her," Andrew admitted, deciding a partial truth was better than a complete lie. "But it's impossible. The woman I'm thinking of, she died years ago." The detective leaned back, his gaze never leaving Andrew's face. "A ghost from your past, huh? Seems like there's a lot about you we don't know, Thompson." Before Andrew could respond, an officer knocked on the van's door. "Detective, we've got something." Ramirez gave Andrew one last searching look before stepping out. Andrew followed, his legs feeling like lead. Outside, the park had been transformed into a crime scene. Floodlights illuminated the area around the fountain, casting harsh shadows across the grass. Forensic teams combed every inch of ground, their cameras flashing in the pre-dawn gloom. Officer Chen approached, her face grim. "We found this near the body," she said, holding up an evidence bag. Inside was a small, ornate key. Ramirez examined it closely. "Any idea what it opens?" Chen shook her head. "Not yet, but there's an inscription on it. It's faint, but we think it says Morales." Andrew's breath caught in his throat. The key had to be connected to Maggie and Eli's family. But how? And why was it in the possession of a woman who, by all rights, shouldn't even be alive? As the investigation continued around them, Andrew's mind was elsewhere. The woman's dying words played on repeat in his head. The truth lies beneath St. Michael's. Find the angel with the broken wing, but beware the watchmen. They see everything. St. Michael's. It had to be St. Michael's Church in the back of the yard's neighborhood. But what truth was hidden there? And who, or what, were the watchmen? Andrew was pulled from his thoughts by Ramirez's hand on his shoulder. "We're heading back to the station," the detective said. "I want you where I can keep an eye on you." The ride back was tense and silent. Andrew could feel Ramirez's suspicion radiating off him in waves. He knew he was risking everything by withholding information, but something in his gut told him it was the right thing to do, at least for now. At the station, Andrew was ushered into an empty office. "Wait here," Ramirez ordered, "and don't even think about leaving." As soon as the door closed behind the detective, Andrew was on his feet. He paced the small room, his mind working overtime. He needed to get to St. Michael's, but how? He was effectively under police guard, and he had no doubt that Ramirez would have him tailed if he tried to leave. A soft knock at the door made him jump. It opened slowly to reveal Officer Chen, her face a mask of concern. "Mr. Thompson, are you all right?" she asked, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. Andrew studied her face, weighing his options. Chen had been kind to him throughout this ordeal. She seemed genuinely concerned about Maggie and Eli. Could he trust her? "I'm fine," he said cautiously. "Just processing everything that's happened." Chen nodded sympathetically. "It's been a crazy night. I can't imagine what you must be going through." She paused, seeming to debate with herself before continuing. "Listen, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I overheard Detective Ramirez talking. They're planning to charge you as an accessory." Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. "What? But I haven't done anything wrong." "I know," Chen said quickly. "I believe you, but the detective thinks you're hiding something, and after what happened at the fountain—" She trailed off, her implication clear. Andrew's mind raced. If he was arrested, he'd have no chance of finding Maggie and Eli. He had to act now. "Officer Chen," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need your help." She looked at him warily. "What kind of help?" "I need to get out of here. There's somewhere I have to go, something I have to check out. It might be the key to finding the children." Chen's eyes widened. "You want me to help you escape police custody? Do you know what you're asking?" "I know it's a lot," Andrew said, desperation creeping into his voice. "But please, you have to trust me. This is bigger than just me or the kids. There's something rotten going on in this city, and I think it goes all the way to the top." For a long moment, Chen said nothing. Andrew could see the conflict playing out on her face. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," she said, "I'll help you, but you have to promise me something." "Anything," Andrew said quickly. "Promise me you'll find those kids, and when you do, you'll bring them somewhere safe. Not here, not to the police. Somewhere they'll be protected." Andrew nodded solemnly. "I promise." Chen glanced at her watch. "All right, here's what we're going to do." 15 minutes later, Andrew found himself in the back of a police cruiser, his heart pounding, as Officer Chen drove him away from the station. They had managed to slip out during a shift change, with Chen telling her colleagues she was taking Andrew to a safe house for further questioning. As they drove through the quiet streets of pre-dawn Chicago, Andrew filled Chen in on what he knew, or at least what he felt safe sharing. He told her about St. Michael's Church, about the mysterious key, about his suspicions of deep-rooted corruption. "I'm risking everything for you, Mr. Thompson," Chen said as they neared the church. "I hope you know what you're doing." Andrew wished he could share her confidence. The truth was, he was terrified, but he knew he had to see this through, for Maggie and Eli's sake. They pulled up a block away from St. Michael's. The old church loomed before them, its Gothic spires reaching into the lightening sky. "This is as far as I can take you," Chen said. "Whatever you find in there, be careful and remember your promise." Andrew nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Officer Chen, for everything. As he watched the police cruiser drive away, Andrew felt the weight of his mission settle heavily on his shoulders. He turned to face the church, its stone walls holding secrets he could only begin to imagine. With a deep breath, he started walking towards St. Michael's. The key felt heavy in his pocket, a tangible link to the mystery he was trying to unravel. As he approached the church steps, movement in his peripheral vision made him pause. A figure stood in the shadows of a nearby alley, watching him. For a heart-stopping moment, Andrew thought it might be one of the watchmen the dying woman had warned him about. But as the figure stepped into the light, he gasped in shock. It was Maggie. The girl looked pale and scared, her clothes dirty and torn, but her eyes were clear and focused as she stared at Andrew. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew you would." Before Andrew could respond, Maggie turned and ran back into the alley. Without thinking, he sprinted after her, his heart pounding in his ears. The alley twisted and turned, leading deeper into the maze of buildings behind the church. Andrew struggled to keep Maggie in sight, calling out to her to stop, to wait. Suddenly, he found himself in a small courtyard. Maggie stood in the center, but she wasn't alone. A group of men in dark suits surrounded her, their faces impassive. One of the men stepped forward, a cold smile on his face. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, "we've been expecting you." Andrew's blood ran cold as he realized the trap he'd walked into. The men began to close in around him, cutting off any chance of escape. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the buildings, illuminating the courtyard, Andrew knew that his quest for the truth had led him into the very heart of darkness, and he had no idea if he would make it out alive. Andrew's mind raced as the men in dark suits closed in around him. His eyes darted between their impassive faces and Maggie's terrified expression. The girl's earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a look of pure fear. "What do you want?" Andrew demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where's Eli?" The man who had spoken earlier, clearly the leader, smiled coldly. "All in good time, Mr. Thompson. You've led us on quite a chase, but now it's time for some answers." He snapped his fingers, and two of the men grabbed Andrew's arms, restraining him. Another approached Maggie, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Now," the leader continued, "you're going to tell us exactly what you know about the Morales family and what was on that USB drive." Andrew's heart pounded. He had to find a way out of this, had to protect Maggie and find Eli. But how? Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the courtyard. "Chicago PD, freeze!" Detective Ramirez's voice rang out, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps. The men in suits turned, clearly caught off guard. In the momentary confusion, Andrew acted on instinct. He threw his head back, connecting with the nose of one of the men holding him. As the man's grip loosened, Andrew twisted free, lunging for Maggie. Gunshots echoed through the courtyard. Andrew tackled Maggie to the ground, shielding her with his body as chaos erupted around them. When the shooting stopped, Andrew cautiously raised his head. The courtyard was a scene of carnage. Several of the suited men lay motionless on the ground, while others were being handcuffed by police officers. Ramirez strode towards them, his gun still drawn. "Thompson, are you all right?" Andrew nodded, helping a shaken Maggie to her feet. "How did you find us?" The detective holstered his weapon. "Officer Chen, she came clean about helping you escape. We've been tracking your phone." Before Andrew could respond, Maggie tugged urgently on his sleeve. "We have to go," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to find Eli." Ramirez overheard. "The baby? You know where he is?" Maggie nodded hesitantly. "In the church, but we have to hurry. The watchmen..." "The watchmen?" Ramirez's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Andrew made a quick decision. "I'll explain on the way. We need to get to St. Michael's, now." Minutes later, they were racing towards the church, Maggie providing breathless directions. As they approached the ancient building, Andrew noticed something he'd missed before, a small angel statue near the entrance, its wing broken off. "There," he said, pointing. "That's where we need to go." They found a hidden door behind the statue, leading down into darkness. As they descended the narrow stairs, the sound of a baby crying reached their ears. "Eli!" Maggie cried, trying to rush forward. Ramirez held her back. "Wait," he cautioned. "We don't know what's down there." The stairs opened into a vast underground chamber. Rows of computer servers hummed along the walls, their lights blinking in the gloom. And there, in the center of the room, was a makeshift nursery. Eli lay in a crib, wailing. As they rushed to the baby, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. A figure emerged from the shadows, the leader from the courtyard, somehow having evaded capture. "Bravo!" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've found our little operation, but I'm afraid your heroic rescue ends here." He pulled out a gun, aiming it at the group. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. The Watchmen have been protecting this city for generations, keeping the balance, ensuring that the right people stay in power. By kidnapping children, by murder." Andrew spat, his body tense as he stood protectively in front of Maggie and Eli. The man shrugged. "Sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The Morales family knew too much. They had to be dealt with." "You're insane," Ramirez growled, his hand inching towards his holster. "Maybe," the man conceded, "but we're also untouchable. Do you have any idea how deep this goes? Judges, politicians, police chiefs, they're all part of it. You can't stop us." As he spoke, Andrew's mind was racing. Something about this room, about the setup. Then it hit him, the USB drive. He pulled it from his pocket. "You want this?" he asked, holding it up. "All your dirty secrets right here." The man's eyes narrowed. "Hand it over, now." Andrew pretended to consider it. Then, in one swift motion, he tossed the drive into the mass of computer servers. Sparks flew as it made contact, and several machines began to smoke. "No!" the man screamed, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Ramirez needed. In a flash, the detective had his gun out, firing 2 precise shots. The leader of the Watchmen crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering away. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the crackling of burning electronics and Eli's whimpers. Then the chamber erupted into activity as more police officers flooded in, securing the scene. Hours later, Andrew sat in an interrogation room, exhausted but relieved. Maggie and Eli were safe, being looked after by social services until suitable guardians could be found. The USB drive, though damaged, had provided enough information to start unraveling the vast conspiracy of the Watchmen. Ramirez entered, looking as tired as Andrew felt. "You did good, Thompson," he said, sitting across from him. "But I need to know everything now. No more secrets." Andrew nodded, taking a deep breath. He told Ramirez everything. About the woman at the fountain, her dying words, his suspicions about corruption in the police force. As he spoke, he could see the detective's expression changing from skepticism to grim understanding. "This goes deeper than we thought," Ramirez said when Andrew finished. "It's going to take time to root out all the corruption, but we've made a start." "What about Maggie and Eli?" Andrew asked. "What's going to happen to them?" Ramirez sighed. "That's complicated. With their parents gone and no other family to speak of, they'll probably end up in the system. Unless..." He trailed off, giving Andrew a meaningful look. Andrew's heart skipped a beat. Unless what? Unless someone were to apply to be their guardian. Someone who's already shown a willingness to risk everything to protect them. The implication hung in the air between them. Andrew's mind whirled with the possibilities, the challenges, the enormous responsibility. But as he thought of Maggie's brave face and Eli's innocent eyes, he knew there was only one choice he could make. "Where do I sign?" he asked. Ramirez smiled, the first genuine smile Andrew had seen from the detective. "It won't be easy," he warned. "You'll be under scrutiny, given everything that's happened, and there's still danger out there. The Watchmen might be wounded, but they're not destroyed." Andrew nodded, a sense of determination filling him. "I know," But those kids deserve a chance at a normal life, and I intend to give it to them. As he left the police station that evening, the weight of the past few days heavy on his shoulders, but a new purpose in his heart, Andrew realized how much his life had changed. What had started as a simple real estate venture had turned into a life-altering journey, exposing a web of corruption and giving him an unexpected family. He thought of the abandoned store where it had all began. It would need work, a lot of work, but maybe, just maybe, it could be transformed into a home. A place where two orphan children could feel safe and loved. As he walked down the streets of Chicago, the city he thought he knew so well now filled with shadows and secrets, Andrew made a silent promise. To Maggie, to Eli, and to himself, he would protect them, care for them, and together they would build a new life from the ashes of tragedy. The road ahead would be challenging. The watchmen were still out there, wounded but not defeated. The corruption in the city ran deep, and rooting it out would take time and effort. But for the first time in years, Andrew felt truly alive, truly purposeful. He hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of his apartment. As the city lights blurred past the window, Andrew allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, he would rest, knowing that two children were safe because of him. And in that moment, despite everything, Andrew Thompson felt like the richest man in Chicago.